NASA publishes a set of instructions for building a piece of Native American survival gear out of a scrap of wood. You can pull it off their science site right now. It is an activity sheet, the kind a school teacher hands out. And from 1883 to 1978, federal policy punished Native people for holding the gatherings where knowledge like that got passed along. So how did the country that spent 95 years trying to stamp it out end up printing the instructions? 25 old camp tricks, counting down. Number 1 is the one NASA hands out itself. That rule was real, and it was written down. On the 30th of March, 1883, the Department of the Interior issued what it called the Code of Indian Offenses, and it set up courts on the reservations to enforce it. Dancing was an offense. Feasts were an offense. The old teachers were an offense. The penalty was jail or having your rations held back for up to 30 days, which in a hard winter is jail with extra steps. Now, none of that outlawed a bough bed or a smoked fish, but it closed the room where those things got taught. You cannot hand a skill down at a gathering that has been made a crime, and the children who would have been standing there learning it were away at boarding schools being trained out of the language it was taught in. So nobody destroyed the knowledge. It was just left with nobody to hand it to. And it kept getting rediscovered anyway by people with budgets. There is a name for the idea sitting underneath every single item on this list, and NASA is the one who named it. In situ resource utilization. Use what is already on site. Do not haul in what the ground will hand you for free. That is the entire philosophy of a moon base, and it is the entire philosophy of a good camp. And the camp has been running that experiment on this continent for a very long time. Everything here comes out of the written record. Fur trade journals, ethnographers' notebooks, archaeology reports, and the museum collections where the actual objects sit behind glass at the Smithsonian and at Parks Canada. Where a thing could be tested outdoors without harming anybody, I tested it. Where it could not, I will say so. Counting down from 25. Number 25, what goes under you matters more than what goes over you. Cold ground does not just chill you. It pulls the heat straight out of your back by direct contact, and it does that far faster than cold air ever will. The old camps solved that problem before they solved any other one. Spruce and fir boughs, laid butt down and shingled tip over tip until the pile is deeper than seems reasonable. Grass, cattail leaves, dry bracken, cedar bark, shredded soft between the hands. Rush mats rolled and carried from camp to camp because a mat that is already made is worth its weight. The mechanism is dead air, not the leaves themselves. The still air trapped between them, held in place so it cannot circulate and carry your warmth off. Compressed insulation is not insulation at all, which is why the pile has to be thick enough that it still has loft after your body weight has flattened it. The rule of thumb in the accounts, and from anybody who has done it since, is to build it until you feel silly, and then add half again. Do that one thing, and you will sleep through nights that would otherwise have you up at 2 a.m. feeding a fire. Nothing else on this list buys you that much comfort for that little work. That is exactly the kind of thing that used to get handed to you at a fire and never written down anywhere, which is why somebody finally sat down and wrote them out. The book is called The Native American Way, 101 Traditional Remedies, Skills, and Recipes from the Old Ways, set down plain, step by step, in the order you would actually do them. The backyard plants and how they were used, the teas and the salves, wild foods, putting up winter stores, fire, shelter, water, and the old cooking. It is written for somebody who has never done a bit of it, and what it replaces is a shelf of gear, catalogs, and most of what people buy before they ever set foot outside. Now go ahead and grab your phone and open up your camera, the same one you use to take pictures. Point it at that square code on your screen and hold it steady for a second. A little link will pop up, give it a tap, and it will take you straight to the book. And if you are watching on your phone right now, the link is waiting for you right down below in the description. Take your time. There's no rush at all. I'll wait right here. All right, something under you, that part is settled. Now the walls. Number 24. Build the shelter small and build it thick. A shelter is not a house. A house is built to hold a room full of air at a comfortable temperature, and a house has a furnace to do it. A brush shelter has one heat source, and it is you putting out about as much warmth as a light bulb. So the old shelters were sized to the body, not to the man's dignity. Low enough that you go in on your knees, narrow enough that your shoulders nearly touch both walls, just long enough to lie down. Then you pile it on, leaves, needles, bark, grass, whatever the ground is offering, until the walls are a good arm's depth through. And that number is not a guess. Every inch of loose debris is one more inch of still air between you and the weather. And thin walls do nothing at all, no matter how neat the frame looks underneath them. The frame is the part beginners fuss over and the part that matters least. A ridge pole, some ribs, and enough brush to hold the pile up is all the frame has ever had to be. The pile is the shelter. The sticks just keep it off your face. Number 23. When the weather gets serious, stop building up and start digging down. Stay with this one because it ends up on a NASA drawing board. Across the plains, families wintered in earth lodges. Frame of timbers layered with willow and grass, and then the whole dome packed over with sod and soil, thick. In the southwest and up through the Columbia Plateau, people wintered in pit houses with the floor cut 3 or 4 feet down into the ground before the roof ever went on. Same principle in both. And the principle is this: air temperature swings wildly between noon and midnight. Soil does not. Go down far enough and the ground sits at roughly the local yearly average and barely moves, so a shelter dug into it starts warm and stays warm, and the fire inside only has to make up the difference. Which brings us to the moon. When NASA works on how to keep astronauts alive up there, the leading answer is to bury the habitat in lunar soil. And NASA's own technical reports give the reason. Soil is a strong insulator, and the brutal day and night temperature swing is largely damped out within the top 3 feet or so of ground. Same physics, same solution. One of them was worked out with a digging stick. Number 22. The lodge that has 2 walls. Picture a teepee, and you probably see a single cone of hide, and that is the version that fails. The real thing has a liner, sometimes called a dew cloth, hung on the inside of the poles and running from the ground up to about head height, with the bottom edge tucked under the bedding. What that inner wall does is create a gap between itself and the outer cover, open at the bottom and open at the top under the smoke flaps. Cold air comes in at ground level on the outside of the liner, gets pulled up that gap, and goes out the top. So you have built a chimney in the wall. That draft feeds the fire without ever crossing the floor where people are sitting, and it carries the smoke straight out instead of letting it settle at head height. It does one more job that people only notice when they skip it. Warm, moist air from breathing and cooking hits the cold outer cover and condenses. With a liner, that water runs down the inside of the outer cover and into the ground. Without one, it drips on you all night. That is a considerable piece of engineering, and it was solved with a second piece of hide. Number 21. Never let half your fire's heat go off into the dark. An open fire radiates in every direction equally, which means if you are sitting on one side of it, roughly half of everything it makes is warming the empty air behind it. The old fix is a wall, a stack of green logs, a slab of bark propped on stakes, a pile of stones, a snowbank cut square, built up on the far side of the fire and angled slightly toward you. Radiant heat bounces. What hits that wall comes back across the fire and lands on you and on the front of your shelter, so you're getting the fire twice. Set the shelter opening the fire and the reflector in a straight line, and the whole space in front of you turns into a warm pocket, and you can feel the difference the moment the wall goes up. Build it about as tall as the flames and a couple of feet back from them. Green wood, damp wood, or stone, because you're building a wall and not a second fire. Number 20. The fire you can sleep next to. A round campfire needs feeding every hour or two, which is why so many first nights out involve somebody sitting up in the dark with cold feet poking at coals. The long fire solves it. 2 logs, as thick as your thigh or better, laid parallel with a hand's width between them, and the coals raked into the gap. Sometimes one log laid on top of the other with a couple of wedges to hold the gap open. The logs burn slowly along their facing edges instead of all over. The gap holds the coals in a narrow trench, and the whole thing throws a long, even bar of heat rather than a hot spot. Lie down alongside it, and your whole body is warm at once instead of just your knees. Green or half-seasoned wood is what you want here, and hardwood if you have it, because you're asking for hours and not for a blaze. A well-built long fire will hold through most of a night, which means you sleep instead of tending it. Number 19. Heat the stone, not the air. Air holds almost no heat, which is why the warmth from a fire is gone the second the flames drop. Rock is the opposite. Rock takes heat in slowly and gives it back slowly, and that difference got used constantly. Stones set at the edge of the fire through the evening, then pulled out with 2 sticks, brushed off, wrapped in hide or bark or a bundle of grass, and put down in the bed before anybody got in it. That bundle is still warm at dawn. In cold country, the same trick warmed a shelter floor before the bedding went down, and heated stones went into the bottom of a travel pack in weather that could take fingers. One warning, and it is the reason people stop doing this after one try. Never use rock out of a creek bed or anything else that has been sitting in water. Wet stone holds moisture in its pores. That moisture turns to steam faster than it can escape, and the stone comes apart, sometimes hard enough to throw pieces. Dry stone from high ground, well away from the water every single time. Number 18. A fire is not out, it is asleep. Restarting a fire from nothing every morning is work, and in the wet it can be an hour of work. So the old camps almost never let it get that far. At the end of the night, you rake the coals into a tight heap. The tighter, the better. And then bury that heap under its own ashes with a couple of inches over the top. Ash is a fine insulator, and it chokes the airflow down to almost nothing. So the coals cannot burn up, but they cannot go out either. They just sit there, smoldering slowly in the dark. Scrape the ash off in the morning, lay on a handful of fine tinder, breathe on it, and you have flame in under a minute. Some camps pushed it further and banked the coals under a green sod or a flat rock, and you can go further still, which brings us to the next one. Number 17. There's a wood that lights soaking wet, and it is free. When a pine dies, resin migrates down and pools in the stump and in the joints where the big limbs met the trunk. The wood around it rots away over the years, and that resin-saturated heart stays behind, hard, orange-brown, and smelling like turpentine when you cut into it. Fat wood, lighter knot, lighter pine. Shave it into curls and it takes a spark in the rain, because the resin is fuel, and resin does not absorb water. It burns hot and long enough to dry out the kindling stacked on top of it, which is the whole problem with a wet fire in the first place. The old camps knew exactly where to look. Old stumps in a pine woods, and the knots left lying after a deadfall has gone soft. A pocketful lasts a season. If you take one thing from this list into your own gear bag this week, make it this one, and go find a rotten pine stump before you need it. Number 16. Friction fire comes down to matching two woods, and almost never to how hard you push. Everybody has seen somebody sawing away at a bow drill and producing smoke and blisters and nothing else. The reason is almost never effort. It is the wood. You want a spindle and a hearth board that are both soft, both bone dry, and roughly the same hardness as each other. Cottonwood root, willow, basswood, cedar, yucca stalk, sotol. If one piece is harder than the other, it polishes the softer one instead of grinding it. And polished wood makes heat, but no dust. And it is the dust that matters. What you are actually manufacturing is a little pile of dark powder, packed into the notch, hot enough to keep going on its own once you stop. The bow, the string, the socket, the posture, all of it is secondary to that pairing. Get the woods right, and a coal comes surprisingly fast. Get them wrong and you could go all afternoon. Number 15. The easiest fire is the one you already had. Making fires work, no matter how good you are. So the old answer, over and over across the whole continent, was to not make it twice. Fire got carried. The vehicles were slow-burning organic material. Punk wood, which is that dry, light, crumbly stuff out of the middle of a rotted log. Certain shelf fungi off dead birch and other hardwoods, dried and worked soft. Tightly rolled bundles of cedar bark or twisted grass. A coal set into that material and shielded from the wind will creep along for hours, sometimes most of a day, and it wants only a breath of air and some tinder to come back to life. Some of the old carriers were a horn or a clay pot packed with ash to hold the coal in a bed. Some were nothing but the bundle itself held so the breeze fed it. Either way, camp moved and the fire moved with it, and nobody stood in the rain at the far end of the day with a bow drill and a bad feeling. Number 14. Snow is not the enemy. Snow is the blanket. This one takes a minute to accept, so sit with it. Fresh snow is mostly air. It is a loose lattice of ice crystals with far more empty space than solid material, and every one of those pockets is still air, which is exactly the same thing your bough bed was doing back at number 25. So, a snow shelter beats a brush shelter outright in the same weather, and it is not close. A space hollowed out of drifted snow, or a mounded pile left to settle and then dug out, will sit near freezing inside while the wind outside is 30 below. Freezing feels almost hospitable when the alternative is that. 2 rules, and both come straight out of the accounts. Keep a vent open, always, because a sealed snow shelter with a person breathing in it goes bad quietly. And keep something between you and the floor, because snow will take heat out of your back with just as much enthusiasm as bare dirt will. Number 13. Dry beats warm every time. The single fastest way to get dangerously cold is to get sweaty and then stop moving. Once insulation is wet, it has stopped working. Water carries heat away from you far faster than air does. So a soaked layer is worse than no layer at all, and it does not matter what that layer is made of. The old practice was constant small adjustment. You open up, shed a robe, loosen the neck of a garment before the sweat starts, not after, and the footwear was designed around it. Moccasins got stuffed with dry moss, sedge, or shredded bark, and the stuffing was pulled out and swapped for dry material at every stop, with the wet handful hung by the fire to be used again tomorrow. That is the part worth stealing. The insulation was treated as a consumable, something you replaced through the day instead of something you put on in the morning and hoped about. Anybody who has spent a January afternoon in wet boots understands immediately why that mattered. Number 12. The plant that does 6 different jobs and the one that will hurt you. Cattail stands in shallow water almost everywhere in North America, and the old camps used nearly every part of it. The dry leaves make bedding and rough matting. The fluff off the seed heads is tinder that catches a spark instantly and stuffs a moccasin. The dried stalks make hand drills for friction fire. The green leaves twist into cordage. The roots and shoots were food. And this is where people who actually know plants separate from people who have only read about them. Cattail has a look-alike, and the look-alike is dangerous. Yellow flag iris grows in the same wet ground, and its young leaves look close enough to fool somebody in a hurry, and it is toxic. The difference is in the base of the plant. Cattail leaves are rounded and spongy in cross-section and come off a round stalk. Iris leaves are flat and stiff, sharply folded, and fan out from a flat base. And cattail leaves smell green and faintly sweet when you crush them, while iris does not. Never eat a wild plant you have not positively identified, and check what your state is currently advising before you gather anything. But learn this one, because cattail always grows where water is, which is exactly where we are going next. Number 11. Do not drink from the river. Drink from the sand beside it. Dig a hole a few feet back from the edge of a stream or a lake, down below the water line, and wait. Water seeps in sideways through the sand and gravel and fills the hole from underneath. Give it 20 minutes to settle, and the top of it comes clear while the silt drops out. That ground you dug through is a filter, and a real one. Sand and gravel strain out sediment and a good deal of the biological load along with it, which is the same principle a modern slow sand filter runs on, at a much larger scale and for a great deal more money. It is why the practice turns up in the desert Southwest and along the plains rivers and in the Great Basin wherever the surface water ran muddy or sat still. It is not sterile, and nobody in the old accounts thought it was. Boiling was still the answer where a fire was possible, and we will get to boiling without a pot in a few minutes. But between a mouthful of silty river and a clear hole in the sand, the hole wins every time. Number 10. The land will tell you where the water is if you know the alphabet. Cottonwoods do not grow where it is dry. Neither do willows. Both send roots down to the water table, and neither one can survive without reaching it. So a line of cottonwoods crossing open country is a map of a creek, whether or not there is anything running on the surface that day. In the desert, that same green line is the difference between a good day and a very bad one. Game trails work the same way. Follow them downhill and watch where they braid together, because separate trails converging means 100 animals a night are all walking to the same place. Birds tell you too. Doves and finches fly to water at dawn and again at dusk, low and straight and with purpose. None of that is folklore. It is reading a landscape as a system where everything alive is already pointed at the same resource, and it costs nothing, which is why it lasted. Number 9. In late winter, the trees hand you a drink. For a few weeks between hard frost and bud break, sap runs up the maples and the birches, and it can be tapped straight out of the trunk with a spile and a container. Sugar maple, black maple, box elder, paper birch. Fresh sap is mostly water with a small amount of sugar in it, and the old camps drank it as it came, cold, in a season when the streams were locked and the snow had to be melted for everything else. That timing is the elegant part. Late winter is exactly when a camp is lowest on stored food and lowest on easy water, and the trees start running at precisely that moment. It is a seasonal supply that shows up on its own in the leanest stretch of the year and requires nothing but a hole and a bucket. Boiling that sap down is where maple sugar comes from. And that industry is a native invention, start to finish, that got handed over whole. Which brings us to the food, and to the 2 items at the top of this list that ended up with the space agency's name attached to them. Number 8. You can boil water in a basket. This is the one that stops people, and it is completely real. Take a tightly woven basket, a bark container, a wooden bowl, or a hide slung in a pit. Fill it with water, then take stones that have been sitting in the fire until they are glowing, lift them out with a pair of green sticks, and drop them in. The water boils almost instantly. Fish the cool stone out, put another in, and you can hold a rolling boil as long as you have hot rocks. Because the water is carrying the heat away from the container faster than the container can burn, the basket survives. That is the whole trick, and it is a genuinely clever piece of thermodynamics discovered by people with no word for thermodynamics. Whole cuisines ran on this: soups, stews, rendering fat, and cooking acorn mush across California. All done without a single fireproof pot. When archaeologists find a pit full of cracked, fire-shattered rock, this is usually what they are looking at. And the same dry stone warning from number 19 applies here, doubled, because now you are standing over it. Number 7. The ground is an oven, and it works better than yours. Dig a pit, line it with stones, burn a hot fire down in it for a couple of hours until the rocks are heated through, then rake out the coals, lay in a bed of green vegetation, put the food on it, cover with more greenery, and bury the whole thing under a foot of earth. Then walk away for anywhere from 4 hours to overnight. Camas bulbs in the Columbia Plateau, agave hearts across the Southwest, fish and shellfish on both coasts, whole animals on the plains. The stones hold their heat for hours and give it back slowly. The green layer turns to steam and keeps everything moist, and the earth cap seals the whole system, so almost nothing escapes. What you get is low, even, humid heat over a long stretch, which is exactly what a modern slow cooker is trying to imitate with a thermostat and a plug. The pit does it with rocks and dirt, and it does it for a crowd. Number 6, thin, cold, and smoky in that order. Drying meat and fish is the oldest preservation there is, and the old racks were built on a rule that is easy to state and easy to get wrong. Cut thin against the grain, so the moisture has the shortest possible distance to travel out. Hang high, and keep the fire small, smoky, and well back, so the meat is drying and moving air rather than cooking. The reasons are real. Bacteria need available water, and pulling the water out takes that away. The smoke is doing two more jobs on top of it, laying down compounds on the surface that slow spoilage and keeping the flies off, which in warm weather is not a minor detail. Now, one thing said plainly for this whole section. The old methods worked in the old conditions with the old animals in the old climate. If you are drying meat or fish or putting any food up at home today, follow the current tested guidelines from your state extension service because the science on time and temperature has moved a long way and there is no reason not to have it on your side. Number 5, the best root cellar has no walls. Cache pits show up across the continent. A hole dug in well-drained ground, sometimes bottle-shaped with a narrow neck, lined with bark or grass or hides, filled with dried corn, dried meat, roots and nuts, then sealed and covered over and disguised so that neither an animal nor anybody else would find it. It works for the same reason the Earth Lodge back at number 23 works. A few feet down, the ground temperature is stable and cool, and it does not swing. So a sealed pit is a refrigerator that runs on nothing. Villages along the Missouri kept the winter's food this way. Plateau families cached at the Comus grounds and came back for it months later. And it is the mobility that makes it clever. A cache lets a group leave food behind and travel light, then return to a full larder in a season when nothing is growing. That is a whole storage strategy and not just a hole in the ground. Number 4, corn that has already been cooked once. Parched corn was the travel ration across the eastern woodlands, and the method is simple. Dry corn is stirred in hot sand or in a hot clay vessel until the kernels swell and toast. Then it is ground into meal, and sometimes maple sugar goes in with it. Toasting drives off the last of the moisture and does part of the cooking in advance, so what you are carrying is light. It will not spoil, and it needs no fire at the far end. A handful eaten dry or stirred into cold water into a thin gruel, and that is a meal. Accounts from the colonial period describe travelers covering serious distances on a small bag of it, and a few of them describe it as the best trail food they ever ate, which is a good place to say we are 3 items from the top, and the last one is the piece of gear that NASA prints the instructions for. Number 3, the original energy bar, and nothing since has beaten it. Pemmican, the word is Cree, pemmican from their word for fat. The Lakota called it wasna. The recipe has 2 parts and a third where they had it. Lean meat, usually bison, sliced thin and dried until it snaps, then pounded to powder between stones. Rendered fat poured over it, roughly equal weight. Dried berries worked in where there were berries. A pound of that carries somewhere around 3,500 calories, which is a full day of hard work for a grown person. In 1 pound, needing no cooking, no water, and no fire. Packed into a rawhide parfleche and sealed with more fat, it kept for years, not months, years. Then look at who ended up living on it. The fur companies ran their entire freight system on pemmican, feeding it by the pound to men paddling 12 hours a day. Lewis and Clark carried it. Roald Amundsen took it to the South Pole. Robert Peary took it north and ranked it first in importance among everything in his supplies, which is a striking thing for a man of that era to say about a food he did not invent. Every high-calorie expedition ration sold today is chasing those same numbers. Number 2, freeze-drying got credited to 1906. The Andes had it running 700 years earlier. Up in the high country of what is now Peru and Bolivia, Quechua and Aymara communities make a food called chuno, and they have been making it the same way for centuries. Potatoes get spread out on the ground overnight, where the altitude drops the temperature well below freezing and the ice crystals rupture the cells. The sun comes up and thaws them. Then people walk on them, treading the melt water out with their feet. Freeze, thaw, tread, repeat for days, sometimes with a soak and a cold stream in between. What is left is gray, wrinkled, hard as a stone, and effectively immortal. Chuno stores for years. The Inca state ran its warehouses on it and fed working crews and armies out of those stores, and archaeologists digging at Tambo Viejo in Peru have pulled chuno out of the ground still in good condition, a find published in the Journal of Field Archaeology. Now compare notes. Freeze drying gets credited as a 20th century invention, dated to 1906. NASA funded the research that turned it into food for astronauts, and the vegetables developed for Apollo came out of that program. Same physics. Freeze the water, then remove it without ever letting it turn back into liquid. One version needed a vacuum chamber and a federal budget. The other needed a mountain, a cold night, and somebody's feet, and it got there first by at least 700 years. Number 1. The piece of gear that NASA publishes the instructions for: snow goggles, Iguk or Ilgok in Inuktitut, Nigaugek in central Yupik, a curved strip of driftwood spruce, caribou antler, bone, walrus ivory, or whale baleen, carved to sit tight against the cheekbones and the brow, with a groove cut for the nose, and 1 or 2 very narrow horizontal slits to see through. Sinew cord around the back of the head. Some were smoked black with soot on the inside face to kill reflection. Parks Canada dates the type back around 800 years to the earliest Inuit period. The obvious job is stopping snow blindness, that burn on the surface of the eye from glare coming off a white field. The slit cuts the light down to a fraction, but the slit does something the makers could not have had a word for. It works like the aperture on a camera. Narrow the opening, and you increase the depth of field and sharpen the image, which means these are not only eye protection, they are corrective lenses carved out of antler. Smithsonian Magazine ran the account of an anthropologist who had recently had surgery on her retinas and whose vision was still fuzzy, holding a pair of Yupik goggles up to her face and discovering she could suddenly see clearly. That is a pinhole camera, understood and built and refined by people who had no optics laboratory and did not need one. And NASA puts a make-your-own version of it on their public science site, naming the Inupiat, Yupik, and Diné peoples it comes from, so a kid can cut one out at a kitchen table and look through it. That is the sheet from the start of this video. A federal science agency teaching native engineering to school children in a country that spent most of a century treating that same body of knowledge as something to be trained out of children instead, which is the real answer to the word banned, and it is worth being precise about it, because the honest version is heavier than the conspiracy version. Nobody in Washington ever outlawed a bough bed. What got outlawed from 1883 until the American Indian Religious Freedom Act finally cleared it in 1978 was the gathering. The dance, the feast, the ceremony, the standing of the old teachers. And a gathering is not just a gathering. It is the school. It is where somebody stands next to somebody older for days at a stretch and picks up things nobody ever wrote down, because nobody had to write them down as long as the gathering came around every year. Break that, put the children in boarding schools where the language it was taught in got punished out of them, and you do not have to ban a single skill. The skills simply stop arriving. 95 years is 4 generations. That is the whole mechanism, and there is no shadowy committee in it anywhere. There is one more piece, and it is the least dramatic and the most explanatory. Nobody could patent any of it. There has never been a dollar in teaching you that the wood in a rotten pine stump lights in the rain, or that a hole in the sand beside a river runs clear. The things that got carried forward were the things somebody could sell you. Willow is the clean example. Bark from the willow was steeped and taken for aches and fevers across many traditions, on this continent and others, for a very long time. In 1828, a chemist pulled the active compound out of it and named it salicin, after the Latin for willow. And in 1897, a Bayer chemist named Felix Hoffmann worked out a modified version that was easier on the stomach. Bayer called it aspirin, and one of the largest industries on earth grew on top of it. And this is the part that gets it exactly backwards in most retellings. Aspirin is not in willow bark. It never was. What is in the bark is a related compound, and the laboratory built something new out of the lead the old remedy handed over. Both halves of that are true, and neither one takes anything from the other. The tree is what pointed anybody at the answer in the first place, and the laboratory took it the rest of the way. None of which is medical advice, and I would not offer any. If you take anything for aches, or you are on medication of any kind, that conversation belongs with your doctor and nowhere else. But hold the whole list up at once and look at what it actually is. Insulation under the body, thermal mass in the ground, dead air, water filtered through sand, calories concentrated for transport, freeze drying, and aperture. 25 separate solutions worked out across a whole continent of different country by people building every one of them out of whatever was lying within arm's reach. NASA has a name for that. In situ resource utilization. Use what is already there. It is the founding principle of every plan we have for living anywhere off this planet. And it turns out to be the founding principle of every camp that ever got through a winter on this one. The old ones were not lucky. They were right, and they were right first. Every one of the 25 is set down plain in the Native American way, written out step by step the way it would have been shown to you at a fire, with nothing in it you have to go by first. Now go ahead and grab your phone and open up your camera and point it at that square code on your screen and hold it steady for a second. A little link will pop up. Give it a tap, and it will take you straight to the book. And if you are watching on your phone right now, the link is waiting for you right down below in the description. Now, if you enjoyed this video, you will enjoy the video right now on screen even more. I can assure you on that. Click it right now, my friend.